If you've never played or heard of Hotline Miami before, the basic idea is pretty simple. You walk into a building, there are people in said building, and once you're done, you leave and go to the next place, rinse and repeat. Not exactly a novel concept on its own. Games like Doom and Wolfenstein predate Hotline Miami by nearly 20 years, but there's a key distinction in the way the game presents itself to the player and the impact that the player's actions have on the game world. When compared to games like Doom, Hotline Miami uses an entirely different style of visual and auditory presentation in order to keep the player engaged. Attacks are meaty, the combat is quick, and reactivity is essential. These factors combine to imbue your actions with intentionality. You cannot afford to be sloppy or inattentive. Every single instance of combat requires your full attention, effort, and input. At the same time, though, playing the game as intended requires blistering speed and pace of combat. And the whole time the music is pumping and there are bright flashing neon lights as you break bones and stab and shoot and climb on top of people and bash their heads in. Every single element of combat pushes you to reach that flow state, to kill people faster, better, with more accuracy, in more varied ways. An exhilarating wave of neon violence and crimson blood, and then, when you're through with the last guy, the music stops, the level clear text appears, and you silently walk through the blood and gore of the people you just murdered. But I'm sure you've heard all that before. The game's been out for more than a decade now, and it isn't exactly obscure. The key and most obvious takeaway is that the game wants you to wonder, how bad is it really to like violent games? After all, none of it's real, right? The original Hotline Miami uses a sort of hyper-violence to interrogate the player in this way, and in a very basic sense, attempts to incite a sense of consideration as to why it is that the player enjoys doing this, and if the "it's just a game" mentality actually holds up. The first game uses a rather common trope to achieve this sort of direct interrogation: a silent protagonist with no observable motives. A blank slate, as malicious or indifferent as the player desires to be. Without even a name, being referred to simply as player in the game files and jacket by the community, his absence of dialogue and easily decipherable character traits serve to contextualize the gameplay not as Jacket's actions, but rather as the player's actions. Aiding in this is the now iconic Richard, an animated chicken mask who serves as the primary meta-commentary of the first game. A nihilistic personality that is seemingly both omniscient and omnipresent, Richard is a recurring character throughout both games, appearing to the different characters and attempting to guide them away from violence. Interrogating both the player and the characters about their actions, asking, among other things, the now iconic question of, do you like hurting other people? But I sort of lied to you. This video isn't really about Hotline Miami. It's about Hotline Miami 2 came out in 2015, 3 years after the original, and I think the best way to think about the relationship between the two of them is that if Hotline Miami 1 did something, it's a safe bet that Hotline Miami 2 directly expanded on it in a slightly different but far more in-depth way. For the purposes of comprehension, the best way to think about the themes and gameplay of Hotline Miami is to imagine the first Hotline Miami as the roots and trunk of a tree, and Hotline Miami 2 as all of the branches. The branches are disconnected from one another, but they all draw from the same source, being the trunk. The trunk is cohesive on its own, but without the branches, the tree is incomplete. A good example of this is characters. Where Hotline Miami had one playable character, technically two, there's an extra epilogue character, Hotline Miami 2 has either 9, 13, or 14, depending on how you count them. But the thing of key importance is that all of the new characters are directly influenced by or connected to Jacket, the protagonist of the first game. Put another way, where Hotline Miami is a game about Hotline Miami 2 is a game about Hotline Miami. A game about what causes bloodshed like is depicted in the first entry, and a game about what happens after it. Given that Hotline Miami is a game about characters, it should logically follow that Hotline Miami 2 is a game expressed through its characters. Despite what I just said, there is some mandatory exposition to get out of the way first. Put briefly, the whole game series takes place in an alternative history where a few things have deviated from what happened in our world, but I'll bring those deviations up as they become relevant. Put very briefly, the events of the first Hotline Miami chronicle Jacket as he, at the instruction of an ultranationalist terrorist organization known as 50 Blessings, punches, stabs, and bludgeons his way through a series of properties owned by the Russian mafia and their associates. This is done by 50 Blessings as an attempt to stop a so-called Russo-American coalition that arose in the aftermath of a war between the US and USSR. But I'm going to be honest, believe it or not, the broader geopolitical context of a game that's about beating people's heads in with a baseball bat and then doing the same to all of their friends isn't super relevant to the moment-to-moment gameplay or to the story most of the time. So you can just forget that until it becomes relevant, which it will, but not for a little bit. Starting with the fans, because that's what Hotline Miami 2 does. They're the guys who've been seeing the B-roll, by the way. They see the actions of Jacket as, for lack of a better term, cool. They don't really have any deep motivation for what they do, and they seem to kill people just out of a sort of morbid boredom. Violence for the sake of violence, brutality without cause. They're essentially a group of thugs who spend the events of the game brutalizing drug addicts and petty criminals. But more broadly, the fans represent the idea of the first game as an outsider might see it, without considering any of the game's implications. A hollow recreation that has nothing to say and no direction. In a more meta sense, the fans are meant to represent all of the Hotline Miami clone games that came out after the original became a hit. It should also come as no surprise, then, that the fans are the first group to be killed off. Without any real goal or endgame, it's kind of the only logical outcome. So, why do we like hurting other people? Well, it's more fun than doing nothing all day. Jake is certainly a character. Within the first few seconds of being introduced to him, you will likely realize that he is indeed different from the fans, but not in the good way. First two things you're likely to notice about Jake, save perhaps for his appreciable size, is the Confederate flag on his couch and his generally ill temper. Where the fans killed out of boredom, Jake kills out of the same fervent nationalism that fuels 50 Blessings. See, I told you they'd come back. He wholeheartedly endorses the killing of the Russians, who he believes to be oppressing the people of the United States. The other side of the missing the point coin, Jake holds the completely unsustainable mindset of, if we just kill all the people that are causing us problems, everything would be better. He is essentially a caricature of ethno-nationalism and the kinds of people that subscribe to it. He is loud, ignorant, and intolerant. A total basket case of an individual that has value only so long as he can further the agenda of others. It should also come as no surprise, therefore, that Jake's nationalist buddies turn on him the moment he becomes too much of a liability. The henchman is the first character that could actually be considered sympathetic to an average person. A high-ranking member of the Russian mafia that survives the first game, he appears in Hotline Miami 2 by asking his boss, another character known as the Sun, to be allowed to leave and settle down, to which he gets the classic one final job that he has to do before he can earn his freedom, so to speak. He is the first of a few characters that are depicted as not necessarily being fully committed to doing harm, or that at least don't want to continue hurting people indefinitely. Unfortunately for the henchman, his lifetime of violence ends up catching up to him. His girlfriend leaves and takes his money, and then his lifetime of violence really catches up to him. The henchman has so little actual screen time and dialogue that it's kind of hard to tell if he had any other motivations than just leaving the Mafia life behind. Regardless, the henchman tells us less about why we hurt others and more about what happens to people who think that the karma of the things they've done won't catch up to them. To interject a little bit here, I initially thought that the henchman was meant to represent people who try to escape the karma of their actions, but now I'm seeing more clearly as I'm getting closer and closer to actually fully finishing the video, and I'm realizing that he's meant to humanize all of the mobsters that you spend the game killing. They're people with lives and families and motivations outside of simply working for the Mafia. Lives and motivations and stories that are cut short in the time that it takes to swing a baseball bat. Viewed through this lens, he becomes a much more sympathetic character, and makes the actions of the other game characters seem all the more monstrous. Richter's actually a character from the first game. He shoots you, you shoot him back, life goes on. The expansion of his story in Hotline Miami 2 paints him in a far more sympathetic light than the original did. Similar to Jacket, Richter is an operative of 50 Blessings who gets coerced into doing their bidding by threat of violence. He's depicted as taking no pleasure in what he does, and the progression of his story as told in the second game eventually depicts him getting away from 50 Blessings and escaping to Hawaii. In classic sympathetic criminal fashion, he has a sick family member, in this case his mother, who he takes care of in between his outings. Like most people probably would after being given a rubber animal mask and told to go attack the Mafia, Richter initially thinks that the phone calls he gets are a joke. Then his car gets firebombed. The implicit threat to the safety of both his home and his mother is enough to keep him working for 50 Blessings until his arrest, where they then try to kill him in jail anyway. For all of his effort, though, he is rewarded. Through his perseverance, he eventually manages to escape and to bring his mother with him, leaving behind the life that he never really chose to lead for as long as he can. Richter's levels are unique within the game in that, like the first game, they all take place chronologically and in sequence, which you would think would be the case for the second game too, but it's actually rather rare for a single character to have even 2 levels in a row. The biggest reason for this is that all of Richter's levels are actually being recounted in real time to another character named Evan Wright. Richter, like another character that will be brought up shortly, is sort of representative of a real human being, somebody with functioning empathy and emotions brought into a world of obscene violence and cruelty. He is painted sympathetically because, in essence, he never really chose to do any of the things that he did. Through this, the game delivers yet another message, that not all acts of violence are necessarily the fault of the person committing them. There are, rarely, cases in which people simply have to do things, or feel that they have to, in order to keep themselves and the people that they love safe. It is a sympathetic struggle, but ultimately one that is not usually applicable to the real world. Evan Wright is a former journalist and an active writer, a peaceful person by nature who is writing a story about the events of the first game. And with the help of his completely useless detective friend, Manny Pardo, he spends his levels non-lethally hitting his way through a few different environments to try and find potential leads. He is the only character where you can actively choose to spare enemies. His first level shows him accidentally kill a gate guard to a Mafia-owned bathhouse, but Every other enemy you encounter is only an optional kill. In terms of all the characters who don't want to continue being violent, his motivation is the most sensible. He is essentially just a normal person dropped into a game where you experience the world as a series of John Wicks and Jason-style masked murderers. This normalcy is used to explore a different kind of pain that the language of the game is less suited to dealing with: emotional. In his pursuit of his story and his prioritization of his work, Evan loses his wife and his kids along with her. In one of only a few meaningful player choices within the game, you can actually choose to have Evan give up writing the book and get back together with his family, or keep pushing forward and lose them for good. Rather fitting, given that personal pursuits are some of the only things that we as people ever have full control over. The only reason Evan ever physically hurts anyone, for the most part, is just because they were going to hurt him first, which, for most people, is likely the only reason they would ever hurt anybody either. Beard is actually a character from both games, similar to Jacket and Richter. In the first game, he's seen as the owner of a variety of different stores as Jacket struggles with his coma. In the second game, he's a Special Forces operative, stationed in Hawaii, fighting against Russian forces as part of the aforementioned war between the US and USSR. Interestingly, among the people that are shown to have served with him are Jacket and the Fans. Though one is a hollow imitation of the other, Jacket and the Fans share the same origins: shattered people created by a pointless war. As opposed to the Fans' apathy or Jake's bigotry, Beard is characterized as calm, collected, and impassionate about his violent actions, similar to the Henchman. He is shown as simply wanting to get the war behind him and to go back home, which he does, but as with all good things, it doesn't last. Beard is rather notable for the way the game portrays his story. He is not, at least as far as I can tell, painted as being in the wrong at any point, as the fault of his actions, part of a military operation, are seen by the game simply as his duty to fulfill and on the hands of those above him rather than on Beard himself. In this way, Beard represents the perfect soldier, essentially. Collected, skilled, but generally unhappy with having to do his job. A reluctant killer that does only what he has to and who takes no pleasure in it. Sometimes people die because to kill them is the duty of somebody else, and nothing more. Manny Pardo is, nominally speaking anyway, a police detective. Outwardly, he spends the events of the game investigating a mysterious criminal known as the Miami Mutilator. And privately, well, I'll give you 3 guesses as to who the Miami Mutilator is. He's shown as being callous and obsessed with appearance, using his position as a detective to avoid scrutiny, despite having a reputation for incompetence. He constantly comments on how the media will react to the things that the Miami Mutilator does, and utilizes his conversations with the crime scene investigator that he works with to determine how much more brutal to make each subsequent murder. The sort of fame by proxy that Pardo strives for is entirely unattainable due to the fact that he is the murderer that he's investigating, and his inability to take full credit for what he does means that he needs to either keep upping the scope of his crimes, or give up and let it all fade for no payoff. His primary conflict is one entirely of his own invention, a prison he has constructed for himself in his futile pursuit of fame. His final scene depicts him dreaming of being a movie star as he moves around different sets and kills police officers before eventually being gunned down. He wakes up on the floor and spends presumably the rest of the day barricading his house in expectation of his imminent arrest. This one is actually a double feature because these two characters here might be the same person. The things you see in Hotline Miami are not always strictly literal. The other character here is Martin Brown. Excluding the intro scene, he only has a single level in which he assaults a police station, kills everyone inside, enters a room with a woman in it, and she shoots him. This is part of a movie set, and after the scene concludes, you see the heads of Manny Pardo and Evan Wright among the police officer actors. Since they feature in the next scene, it is a reasonable assumption that Martin Brown is a sort of fantasy that Pardo has, and that he wants to be able to imagine himself as this famous actor who does all of these things as part of a movie. Funnily enough, this is also the exact stated motivator that Brown has, as opposed to literally everybody else in the story who at least wants something out of the violence they commit. Brown's only motivation is simply that he has always wanted to do this. A tacit admission by the game that not every violent action has a deeper meaning behind it. Sometimes, the only reason people get hurt is because somebody wanted to hurt them. The son is kind of an amalgamation of several different characters and ideas. In case the name didn't give it away, he's the son of the leader of the Russian mob that you kill in the first game. The son's entire identity is one that is depicted as being not entirely his own, both in terms of gameplay and actual character traits. Literally speaking, he can only ever live in the shadow of his father, never able to fully replicate his success. Like Jake, he holds a grievance against another group for past misdeeds, in this case the Colombian cartel that took over the majority of his father's assets after his death. Even gameplay-wise, all of his abilities are identical to those of the fans, and thematically, where the fans are the first group introduced and represent the issues that plague a knockoff, the son, in the same way, is representative of the issues that face sequel entries. All of the defining choices of his life were made for him before he ever got a say in them. Despite nominally being free to do essentially whatever he wants, he is still beholden to the aftermath of the choices that those before him made. His final level, the last level in the entire game, is the son taking a bunch of drugs, losing his mind, killing the fans and a bunch of his own men, and then jumping off the roof. Going back to his relationship with the fans, it is certainly no mistake that he ends up being the one to kill them off, given what each of them likely represent. The insane sequel to an already crazy game, killing off its competitors just before the end. While Hotline Miami explores why we as players enjoy violence, Wrong Number explores why we as people are violent. As a pastime, as an execution of orders, as an expression of bigotry, for fame, or for no reason at all. Hotline Miami was about you. Hotline Miami 2 is about us. Thank you for watching. I really wish I could have made this video better, and to fully do the game justice. The more I played Hotline Miami and the more I read about it, the more I realized just how smart the game is with its thematics, storytelling, and overall design. There were several sections of this script that I ended up rewriting multiple times because the more I thought about how they connected to each other, the more I realized how deep the analysis could go. You may have also realized that this video sort of wobbled between character analysis and meta-analysis, and if you noticed that, well, first of all, good job, you're very observant. But secondly, it just kind of happened on accident because I went into the video with the idea that every character in Hotline Miami represented some sort of specific reasoned expression of human violence and cruelty, without ever considering that some of them served more as meta-commentary on the nature of the game Hotline Miami, or on society, or on any number of other smaller topics. So I decided to just talk about what flowed best and what seemed the most important, since the video would have never escaped scriptwriting land otherwise. And full warning, I will almost certainly end up digging this script out of my documents folder in about 6 months and start making a 7-hour-long sequel video on the secret, deep hidden meaning behind Hotline Miami 2. But I digress. It's been fun. I had a really good time making this, and I hope you had a good time watching it. But you know what they say about good times, don't you?